Hello everyone, so in today's video I'm out shooting in Taipei at nighttime and I'm trying to get some nice long exposure shots. So I'm trying to get a nice streak, sort of light streaks of the cars driving past, and trying to produce some leading lines with the headlights themselves. Now in general, taking long exposure shots of cars especially, it's good to get a more elevated position, as you can get a more perspective on where the light's moving, and you can have a nice follow. You can follow the light through the scene. When you're down at the same level, the light would be coming more towards you, or you're getting it from a profile view and it's just more flat in terms of a perspective. So I just hopped up here on a nice little pedestrian bridge here, and it's a great perspective looking down on top of the traffic flowing underneath. And as I'm in the scene, I'm trying to spot what the traffic's doing and what kind of lights, and is it a busy intersection, or you can see pedestrians on the left hand side there, so I'm looking at them as well, thinking how can I use all these elements in a long exposure shot. So to begin with, it's more just trying to learn the scene a bit and what's the light doing in the scene. So in this first shot here, just more of a test shot, just trying to get a feel of the lights, how the light's looking, and also just the scenery in general. So you can see some nice fairly tall buildings in the distance up at the end of the street. So I'm thinking of these things as I'm taking the shots, and how can I use the light to better the composition. So as I was watching the traffic move around, I spotted a sort of alternative way to shoot it, was to wait until the traffic was at a turning point, so that just when the lights were allowing people to turn. And I thought that was an interesting view to that, because the whole scenery around it is quite rigid. It's buildings, bridges, a lot of straight lines. The traffic's all moving fairly straight lines as well. So get a nice long exposure of the curves and adding that into the composition, it just adds a slightly more organic shape to it, and I think it gives a different feel to the overall shot itself. So as I'm looking around this scene, I thought I'll try and get a bit more focus on the road into the distance, trying to get some of the buildings and get a bit more of a wide-angled perspective with the lines leading into the distance. Just a bit more of a sort of conventional shot with just more straight lines all pointing in one direction. So that was kind of more what I was trying to go for in this one, and this was a bit more of a longer exposure on this one. This is more near the 30-second mark, but you can see here I really like the way that the light turned out in the top left area, where it's quite bright and vivid. I thought that was quite nice the way it came out. It felt like it's sort of emanating that light. This is another location that I stopped for some long exposure shots. Again, I've gone up these steps. It's near one of the big bus stations in Taipei, and I've gone up these steps in another elevated position, again for this exact same reason. You just get that much better perspective on the scene looking down, and you can play around with the light streaks a lot more. Now in this scene in particular, there's this huge building on the right with this big screen, and I thought I'd try and make that as part of the composition as well, as it adds something new and different to it. And compared to the last scene, there's a lot more going on in this scene. It's harder to get a sort of clean composition, as there's a lot more crisscross happening, and there's like a big wall of light on the right hand side, and there's a fairly large building with all the windows lit up on the left hand side, and the traffic's just flowing in between that. So it's a slightly more messy view, I guess you could call it. But because of that, you can play around more with what's happening and the traffic in particular on this intersection seemed to be fairly random in terms of how it was moving. Sometimes it would be really slow, and other times it would be flying past, and it seemed to just change pretty quickly from time to time. I think I was there for maybe like 20 minutes to half an hour, and the traffic just seemed to change all the time, so I was constantly trying to adapt and try different lengths of shots with the long exposure and seeing how things would turn out. So as I'm looking around on these shots here, I'm trying to see how can I use the traffic and try something slightly different. and because the traffic's moving fairly slow, I tried to go for a slightly slower composition and see if I can capture some of the pedestrians going across the road as well. So you can see here, you can actually see some of the cars that are stopped. They're actually visible in the shot, even though it's a long exposure. So this exposure is maybe more around the 2-second mark, so you're not getting as much movement in terms of the light, but you are able to capture the pedestrians crossing on the right hand side there. And I quite like this weird texture that came up in the traffic that's coming past. So you can actually see some of the cars on the corner there because they're not moving during the exposure, and then you have that mix with the vehicles and the buses that were coming across the scene there, and you get that sort of weird bubbly light texture, which is, I found out was quite a nice way it turned out. Around at the scene, I could see that this big wall of light on the right hand side, as it changed images, it lit up the scene in front of it quite differently. So you can spot in front of just on the crosswalk there, just depends upon the screen, you can see quite a big difference in the light that surrounded the area. So I started to look at that and think, how can I use that and work with that light to bring something interesting? So as I was watching it and seeing what the light was doing, I could see whenever it was a slightly more whitish light, it seemed to sort of elevate that area of the scene slightly more. I don't really know how to explain it exactly, but it just seemed to bring that area up into focus a bit more, and it felt slightly otherworldly. I think it was just that unnatural color temperature that was popping up that area of the scene. So that's what I tried to do on this one, was wait until it get a nice more whitish light coming off it and take a few shots around there. And again, I'm always trying to spot what's the traffic doing, what can I use, and is it going to be an interesting time to take the long exposure. So in this one I tried to take, so this is a longer exposure, so you get much cleaner lines crossing the scene there with the light. And I got a little bit of luck on this shot with a bus that was waiting to turn, so that was still nice and clean in the shot. Something of interest on the left hand side of the scene there. So I hope you liked this week's video, guys. I appreciate it if you'd like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thanks!